Estate Agency X, the UK's #1 estate agency podcast discussing the future of estate agency, entrepreneurship and business with hosts Mark Burgess and Rob Brady. In this episode of Estate Agency X, I've got Stephen from RedRoots Properties. Stephen runs a self-employed hub model that's been covering the Yorkshire area for about 2 years. In this episode, we cover self-employed agency, video marketing, building out databases. So if that sounds interesting to you, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having us.
So for anyone listening or watching out here, give us a bit of background on who Stephen is and RedRoots.
Sure. So I guess I'll give you the slightly extended version. So Stephen Geer from RedRoots Property, co-director with my brother Matt, based in between Doncaster and Wakefield, so that's south-west Yorkshire border. I guess really the background is the property's always been in the blood, so to speak. So my dad, for example, he started turnaround properties back in the early 2000s time, sort of in a DIY type fashion, really, just picking up the cheapest house on the street, turning them around and either selling them on or renting them out. So yeah, he's sort of on a rinse and repeat model to get him out of basically his lorry driving job, which fortunately eventually came for him. So plenty of long days for him, that's for sure. But fast forward to 2011 time, and he created a letting agency. So managed to survive the drama of 08 and what have you. And then unfortunately, he got into business with his business partner at the time, and started renting out properties for people similar to himself, really. Not necessarily from a professional background, but just kind of like the idea of building these property portfolios. And obviously, in those earlier days, there were people with mass portfolios, particularly in our poor areas, with the whole same-day refinancing and things like that. So an interesting time, but during this time, there was my brother Matt, who was slowly starting to come into the business. So he was a plasterer by trade, but then he started to sort of get his turn his hands to a few things from a maintenance perspective. So that worked quite well in terms that you had the letting agency, and then you had this this maintenance team forming. And then for myself personally, I always stayed in school, so I stayed in school into sixth form and then onto uni. So as with most family-run businesses, I always mucked in and did bits where I could in the summer holidays, but there was never really an opening for me. I think from my dad's side, there was limited funds coming into the business, so then to try and shell out for Matt's wage, and then realistically just fund it for me, even though I didn't know what I was doing. At the time, it was like you're 14, 15 years old, and if the phone rang, you were like, oh, didn't want to answer it. So, I had to, for example, I was led, particularly by my mum, to stay in school, go to uni, get my degree. So that's what I did. I became a podiatrist in the NHS. So, interestingly, I thought, that sounds sensible. Matt can be doing up the houses. I've got a nice, clean-cut job in the NHS. It'd be great from a lending perspective. So graduated in 2017 time, and then spent 3 years in the NHS. But during that time, what I'd done was sort of build the relationships, obviously, with staff and colleagues, and recognise that other people wanted to build their own portfolio or invest in property. And at the time, the interest rates were really low. So they were thinking about, pension's not quite what it was, so into property, but then that kind of scared some people. So we had two forks to it. We had the people building the portfolio, and then people who would be willing to share their savings with us so that we could do what we needed to do, and then we'd give them a passive return on their money, leveraging obviously property as the security. So that became more of a business than I thought it would do initially. I thought it was just a bit of a hobby, and I was thinking it was quite cool that my colleagues were now becoming landlords on my dad's business. Matt was getting the refurb work, so it made sense. And sure enough, that sort of start to end service was becoming a true business, so to speak. So fortunately, the cash flow was sufficient enough, and it allowed that me and Matt could build up the rental portfolio, which brought in obviously a further cash flow. Bits from the sourcing side, which we were doing. And all of a sudden, like I said, 3 years after joining the NHS, I handed my notice in to go full-time into property, with the idea of doing more of what we were doing, just with a bit more time. So then fast forward to sort of 2020 time, started trying to bring in the sales arm. Obviously, we're going out direct to vendor and trying to get these off-market properties, But of course, they weren't suitable for every landlord, so it made sense that we had the sales arm to sort of knit together the circle. So then we guess we did what we always knew, which were try and undercut everyone around us. You know, they're doing all right. They've got signs everywhere, so we'll just do it a couple £100 cheaper, and sure enough, we'll be doing all right. And we did okay. We did everything poorly. Weren't on right move. So yeah, it was all a bit tin potted, I'd call it. You know, but we learnt as lessons. And then as the years evolved, we recognised that as sort of me and Matt were now very much full time and trying to push things and try new things that we sort of wasn't aligned with my dad's business partner, and obviously it was his name above the door at the end of the day. So we just decided, right, you know, respectfully, we'll go away and we'll do our own thing. So my dad's property shop, which would, like I say, at this point we'd been a part of for 9-10 years, was literally number 3 Barnsley Road, and we moved to 17 Barnsley Road to open up RedRoots. So yeah, it was a big change. We lasted about 12 months on the high street, and by that point we figured out where we wanted to go as a business, which was to build out this self-employed model. And I guess from my side, what it's always been about is the multiple of opportunities from dealing with people. You know, we've got like the sourcing side, we've got the refurb side, we've got the letting side, now we've got the sales side. How do we then begin to scale this up? So obviously the self-employed model sort of seemed to fit in with that. So if we're bringing buyers in from out of the area and things like that, it'd be great for our partner agents. So that's sort of where we're at now. I guess in this present days, we're speaking September 2024. We've got 3 self-employed partners. We've got a couple of members of staff in our hub office, and then we've got a couple of guys in the maintenance team. So yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster of a journey, but we are where we are, and I'm happy with it.
Wow. Okay. So I guess the first question that comes to mind for me, the self-employed people that are working with you now, are they looking to also build portfolios themselves, or have they joined purely as sort of, what people would class a normal estate agent? Like, how's that? I don't know. How's that proposition working now?
Yeah, so I mean, the agreements that we've got at the moment is that the licensees, the self-employed partner agents, they've got their own limited company, and then they license our brand to do all things like you say, estate agency side. So very much bring that personal service to their clients. Sort of what they do with the funds, really. It would be nice to see them go on to build a portfolio to try and almost break that sort of tie of sort of trading your time for money constantly. As we know what agencies like, it's tough going. So I guess really in the good times, it'd be nice to see them reinvest that, and obviously into the property world. It'd be great if they became even future landlords. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much as long as they're happy that they've got a good living from it, that they're running the business how they want, they're getting the support, the guidance, and everything they need from us. Then it'd be quite interesting. I think that's one of the draws to dealing with essentially business owners, in the sense where they have their own ideas. So yes, always me and Matt's like, save up, right, deposit into the next one, you know, and try and always have a couple on the go. But obviously everyone else has slightly different ideas. So it'd be quite interesting to see how they develop their own business and what they do from a future perspective. So yeah, it's time will tell.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you before the podcast, I think that I would probably touch on this. Like, so the self-employed model is sort of very prominent at the moment in estate agency, and you were at the beginning of that, like a few years ago. Like, you started up your business and stuff, and decided it was going to go self-employed. Like, the learnings that you've had over that period of time from how you perhaps thought it was going to go, you know, was there ever a point, for instance, where you just thought to yourself, it's going to be great, we'll probably have like 30 people working self-employed by the time we get to like a few months have passed? Or, you know, what sort of realities have you learnt during that period of time about starting a self-employed model in a estate agency?
Yeah, it's certainly been a journey, but in terms of when we rewind to a couple of years ago when we were starting to think about how it'd work, and there were so many positives to what, you know, which would complement the other businesses that we had, it just seemed commercially just almost common sense really to do what we were trying to do. And I think because of the time where we were so sort of, I guess, vulnerable from a cash flow perspective to try and then get onto the high street to then try and do all the branding, to do everything. We sort of felt the pinch of what was like the whole fixed cost side and what have you. So the idea of having the self-employed agents, it gives us an ability to scale, but then allow us hopefully to sleep at night, really, from a cash flow perspective. I think from a personnel point of view, we've had our run-ins with wrong uns, shall we say, people who weren't right for our business, and we've felt the pain from that, and we've ushered them out. And I guess, if anything, I'm probably too conservative with who we let in, really. I think coming from the culture, which is such a tight-knit family, it's very hard to then say, right, come on into the circle, because at the end of the day, like, you're almost exposing yourself. Like I say, you're being vulnerable every time you take on a new partner. Is it going to upset the apple cart? And, you know, all these issues around it that can stem from it. So,
do you think then what did you learn that, like, in the beginning it must have been a case of like, well, there's some people interested, we'll take them on, and they're going to be our self-employed agents, and from what you've said, it sounds like then you get to experience the ones that weren't right for the business. How did you, looking back, how would you identify that, like, quicker?
I think trying to not get too deep with it, but just see who they are as a person. I mean, when you look back and the amount of things that I'd sort of overlooked because the results were there, the cash flow was coming in, and in theory this person on paper was performing. And yet, you know, there'd be regular sort of little things which would bug you as a person. You know, for example, my granddad were in a wheelchair, and one individual always park in disabled bays because it were quicker to the shops. It's like, that's something which it's like, well, I know what it's like for my granddad if there's no disabled spots, for example. So little things like that, really, where it's like, if you sort of get what we're about, you wouldn't do that. So I think really being more receptive to those smaller little signs, really, that just not really our cup of tea. Yeah. You know, would you go for a drink with them and think, yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting this person? So I think it is just hard from a business perspective when you are sort of turning away, well, essentially money. You know, it's this guy's performing, but he did this. It's like, we just, you know, like I said, we've sort of we've had our fingers burnt, so we've learnt our lessons. And I think if we weren't as receptive now, then we'd find ourselves in that position, and I wouldn't want to be in that position again. So, yeah, I guess I know there's a saying, isn't there? Hire slow but fire fast. We're just in that very much hiring slow process. And as well, like, I mean, a couple of partners, for example, we've got Laura, we've got Ben, we've got Gabby. All three of them I've known of for several years, you know, in one degree or another. So again, you get a good sort of feel for what they're like as people, you know, behind closed doors. So it'll be something which I'll have to get over and be able to recognise when I don't know sort of the history and things like that. And I guess that's for me to figure it out, really, and the success of it will be be dictated by that. But like I say, it's all part of the development process.
It's a great thing to learn. I mean, like, you know, we've spoken many times, haven't we, about it's just very hard. Running a business, what could you want? What could you want more than somebody that's doing the figures, you know?
Sure.
But as you say, like, actually, that's not necessarily always enough. You know, like, you don't want somebody who's not doing the figures. Obviously, that's a problem as well. So, you know, it's just, but you can't afford to have your whole culture and, you know, the whole basis of the company ripped apart by somebody that is doing the figures but just doesn't act the way that that RedRoots as a company is supposed to act. Because if they do decide to leave or go at some point, then, like, really they've just left a trail of destruction behind them.
What have you learned from your first onboarding of maybe the newer partners you got on now? So, like, from 1 to 3, is there anything from those short period of time you've learned from, like, you know, when actually their first day of starting their self-employed business under you to maybe, like, the most recent one? Is there any changes you've had within that, or any recommendations out there?
Yeah, I think the organisation side, obviously you don't know what you don't know, so obviously you've got a vision in your mind, right, when we get our first one, this will be what it looks like, and then obviously the reality is it's like, that might cover 5% of it, and then obviously, like, to a degree you are trying to figure out the rest almost as you go along, really. I think from our side, once you've been through the process, you're just making sure you're documenting everything. That seemed to work well, making sure everything's structured and organised. I mean, it worked quite well really with Laura, who was the first partner to onboard. That basically, she's quite a go-getter, so we had the initial conversation, and like I said, we knew of each other, and then it was pretty much like, right, I've handed me notice in, so then that soon sharpens your focus to make sure that, we'll do everything we can, because we're going to have someone who's going to be operating under our brand, and we need to make sure we're supporting them as much as they can, because they're going to feel a bit like stepping into the abyss, to be fair. So yeah, I think from looking at partner 3, it was more slick with the operations point of view, do the journeys, do the videos. There were a lot of things which it feels a lot more smoother now, where straight off the bat, you almost take a weight off the shoulders just thinking, right, what does that first 30 days of social media content look like, for an example? What happens when inevitably the phone doesn't just ring on day one and things like that? How do we start to build this so that it's more of a predictable path rather than just going, right, that's it, I just need to go door knocking, for example. So, yeah, almost take a step back and just think, right, this is how it'll flow. And I think just that relaxed nature almost sort of settles them down a bit, because, I've gone it from being employed to self-employed. I know what that feels like, and it's scary. It's great in the sense where you got a free diary, and it's like, wow, all this time to do all these wonderful ideas that we've had. But then it's like, sure enough, I used to have the idea that every day I'd write on the whiteboard what I've done, prove my worth and that side. And sure enough, like, you just get eventually caught up in the whirlwind, so you just need that bit of guidance and support to know that you're in the right direction. So definitely the organisation.
And the partners, are they come from traditional agency backgrounds, or is it, are they new to the industry?
A bit of a mixed bag, to be fair. So we've got Laura. She worked her way up with a local agency to branch manager level. They were probably the latest agency to bin the newspapers. Laura joined 4 or 5 years ago now, and I believe they're still in the newspaper at that time. So very, very much old school. You'd only have to look at the average age of their directors to sort of get a feel for what they were like as a company. And I think Laura, being on the coalface, so to speak, going out valuing, knowing the sort of the fees they were charging, she's a switching off on person. You could see like, how is this possibly sustainable? You can see all the team getting fractured and frustrated, and some leaving and what have you. So yeah, that was an interesting background. We had Ben, who came from very little experience, but he came into the office, so we knew him from the local triathlon club. But basically, again, lorry driver background. So he spent 12 months coming in, doing everything right, doing all the courses, getting himself trained up somewhat. But I think even though he's not had the significant amount of experience estate agency side, the fact he was local, that he was real, pretty much everything sort of summed up like the deeper values. That the experience sort of felt like it became irrelevant because he was learning that.
Let's be honest, within about a week you're experienced estate agent anyway.
It's quite mad how fast you can actually get up to speed with it.
Yeah.
And I think he surprised himself, like, the phone ringing, the houses selling, the first completion, going through all these things. And it's like, I've done what, I get it. I've been paid for what I've done, and the client's really happy. I've got a 5-star review. Sort of feels like he's cracked it at the minute. Obviously, he's going to get hit by a wall at some point when he starts getting withdrawals and fall-throughs. But we're managing through that process. But the reality of like the actual operations side, if you're a decent person and you genuinely care about them, you pick up the phone and things like that, then you're halfway there.
I think a lot of people actually that they want within an estate agent is to be there on the journey. With them, guidance, supporting them, getting it through, like a companion or partnership on that, rather than it just being a sales person. So like you said, because I know when you were setting up RedRoots, we had those conversations about what even RedRoots before even the name, what was the name, what was the brand, what you wanted to represent. And it's pretty much you could laying down the roots of the local area, the communities, and not just being seen as this traditional sleazy estate agent that parks in the disabled car parks in the newspaper.
So when you're going out and seeing somebody on a valuation, or any of your partners are, how do you try to, I don't know, differentiate from the guy who says, "I'll put you in the newspaper and stick you on Rightmove"?
I don't know how the others sort of operate. I think what's always worked well for me, probably a bit from the healthcare background, to be honest. there's quite a lot of similarities. The patient walks in, you've got to find out what is the actual issue. And I guess really as an estate agent, you're going around, obviously they want to sell their house, okay, great. So that's the sort of the diagnosis, so to speak. But much like with the patient, if they come in, you could have 10 people with the same diagnosis as such, but then 10 different management plans, because they've all got these different little avenues really as to where they want to go and what their expectations are and what the concerns are from previous and things like that. And I've always found like being a decent listener and asking the good questions, you really get into the nitty gritty of what do you expect from me? You know, what was your experience like last time you moved? Well, it was great. Oh, fantastic. Well, how do we make sure that's repeatable? You know, it was rubbish. Why was it rubbish? Well, because I couldn't get hold of them, or you know, I felt like I left money on the table, and you can walk them through that process. I think from my side, that feels more natural. I've never seen it as like doing like sales courses or trying to learn the lingo or anything like that. Just being able to ask the right pertinent questions and then sort of getting the answers and having the remedy for it. And then I think when you stack it on top of that, the quality of that we do, the marketing and things like that, I think it almost shows itself. And I feel like now where the brand is, RedRoots feels like there's no house where it's just like, we'll cut a few corners here. You know, everything is very much set in stone. The partners know what to expect, and everyone's buying into this. And obviously, when you start adding a bit of volume and the quality, then it helps with the whole brand awareness side. So it's what we truly believe in, and I think, in fairness, locally, you only have to look at, for example, just part of the marketing of the other agents and start saying, right, okay, there's marketing, then there's marketing. You know, why do we do it like this? And then having those conversations to build it out to why does that look to give you a great outcome. With, for example, the self-employed side, the whole sort of start to finish side, a lot of people understand that even just having an offer accepted is half the battle. How do we get to all the completion sides? From a service level point of view, it's there, it's got you covered. You know, you almost sound different to the other agents where it's like, but then we'll introduce you to someone you've never met. Yeah. But she's really good, she's really nice and all that side. Whereas at least it's like, here's my direct number. You will be able to contact me whenever you wish, ultimately, until we get over the finish line. So I feel like there's so many different a different value proposition ultimately for the client to choose. And obviously we don't go out and win every listen, obviously, but I think it's enough of a difference to be able to say, right, okay, well, it's between them or it's between these. Yeah, and there's a lot of things. In the reality of that is there's a lot of things to manage in there, because, you know, you can have my direct number and you can talk to me anytime, but obviously you've got other clients, you've got self-employed agents that, you know, you've got to manage. You're managing your own properties, and so I'm interested as well from a self-employed person's point of view. You know, they can put a lot of effort in when they begin, but then they've got listings that they've got to work on and get new business. And so how do you use technology to help them or help you to manage all of that? You know, if I take a RedRoots license, I'm self-employed, great, and you can give me some guidance on the onboarding, but forgetting technology for a minute, I'm going to need to do all my own social media posts. I'm going to need to, you know, follow up with all my viewings. I'm going to need to follow up with all my valuations. I'm going to need to speak to these people, make content, put stuff on social media, and I've got to be an estate agent, and I'm all on my own. So, like, how does the support side of things work at RedRoots on that? Yeah, so with the technology that we use Lifecycle, for example. One of the things from going back to when we were involved in my dad's business, where it was a very basic CRM, you felt the pressure of one new rental paralysed the office. Phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was just absolutely chaos. Notes were everywhere. You think back to it and it was almost like you resented growing, because as soon as a new bit of business came in, it was like just chaos. Yeah, that's it. Whereas obviously now, like, I think we when we joined with Lifecycle, it was too early. Like, it made no real financial sense, in fairness. But we had the vision of knowing that if we could grow the database, if we can work a bit smarter, the longevity is there. You know, it was at a time where we're at an age where we can embrace technology and recognise that, yeah, you know, little simple automation such as a buyer getting an automatic qualification email, so that if you've got a property in straight away over a weekend, it's particularly on the letting side, the 40, 50 inquiries, right, well, 30 have qualified themselves, right, well, there we are. We'll pick the best ones from there. So you start accumulating almost hours and time back from the technology doing a lot of the I guess the mundane stuff. Because I mean, at the end of the day, even from like a staffing point of view, they don't want to be going through the same question on repeat, almost doing this automated voice message. Where do you want to look for? How much rent can you? You know, it drives them crackers. It drives me crackers listening to it. So the fact that the technology does that, all of a sudden it's like, right, first thing, within an hour, all your viewings are sorted. You've got a nice block of viewings. Away you go. So from a self-employed side, I think tapping into that. I think the fact that we all share the same database. Obviously, we've got buyers registering at all hours of the day, which is always nice to see. And then obviously we're basically creating one big pool of buyers that we can obviously then begin to start marketing out to and build up that brand side. And
because those, sorry to cut in, because those buyers are registering themselves, that's happening. Is that like, I'm just thinking for people that are listening to this that don't know how any of that works. So you're sharing a database and the buyers are going, to your website and registering there?
A lot of them come through with the social media side, so just making sure that people recognise, and it's all part of our marketing strategies, so that they see the social media side. They know that if they're registered with us, they will see properties before they hit Rightmove and Zoopla. And I guess from our side, we've got to work hard to make sure that that is as much as possible. Really, from a business side, thinking clinically that we need to get people registering in and almost show our importance. But then also, I think, again, when we mentioned about like going back to other agents, what they'd be saying into a living room, for example, like, so if we can build out the concept that people come to our social media side and look for our properties to be alerted to them prior to them hitting the portals, hopefully they get the houses they want. That then triggers the whole sort of, I guess, from the data perspective, we can then market out to these people. We can demonstrate our value, that perhaps we've got buyers that have got active, keen eyes on us. So we'll regularly flick out on the iPad, just showing when these people were last active. For example, this is a buyer looking for your specific property, i.e. 2-bed semi on this street, up to this budget, etc. They were active on our website 16 minutes ago. I think there's all too much importance on, such as things like your Rightmove and your Zoopla. But if we said to our licensees, our self-employed agents, go and find as many viewings as you can within the system prior to it in Rightmove and Zoopla, that creates a whole new, it almost gives you that lifeblood of almost what I imagine in the old school agency would have been like, the good old school agents, right? Well, pick up the phone, you start talking to people, and out of that, naturally, they're going to be just picking up on the inevitable opportunities which come off the back of it.
I guess, like, because it's interesting to listen to that, because without, it all sort of ties together, because without, in a traditional CRM that an agent would use, if you think back to maybe like, I don't know, pre-life cycle, back at the property shop, wherever it might have been, in normal CRMs, you would always be able to put buyers in, but it's not that specific. You know, you sort of tick a few boxes, don't you? You say like, yeah, this person's looking in, I don't know, Barnsley. Like that really means anything.
Sure.
But it doesn't get much more specific than that. But when people can go online and specifically put in their details, like you would if you were setting up a Rightmove alert or something, then that's then triggering you being able to go around someone's house and it to look a little bit more relevant, rather than going, look at this, I've got, 38 buyers all looking in Barnsley. The person would be like, well, that doesn't mean anything. But you're able to go, let's go within half a mile of your house and see how many people I've got. And not just that, 3 of them have just been on our website. And then it sort of moves on from there, I guess, doesn't it?
We were doing it in like when we had our session the other day, didn't we? Ben had a valuation to go out to, wasn't it? And we narrowed it down, and I think you're talking thousands of contacts, and then we narrowed it down to active buyers. It was thousands, and what I loved about it was going forward, as you bring on more self-employed partners, it's not like here's an access to something, but you've got no one in there. You've got to build it all up. Like RedRoots is automatically supplying.
They're starting up.
Like here's actually people that we can work with and actually partner with, rather than just going, oh, we're going to support you. But you, like you said, you day one, you've got to try and find listings, you've got to door knock, you've got to try and do whatever you can to try and get business in. And also on top of it, once you get a listing, it's like, but you need buyers to find it. Not, sure. I'm gonna go on to, I'm going to say we put it on socials and we'll find people before, but secretly deep down, I've got no buyers in the back end of my database. So I've got to go to Rightmove anyway. Whereas at least with you guys, where you're collaborating, you've got the ability for your new partner to come on board. They find a new listing, and at least they've got some people to go out to.
Confidence,
Yeah, it's good.
One of my pet hates is like when I see an agent put a property on social media and say, I've just taken on this great listing. Does anyone know, who might be interested in it? And I sort of think, isn't that your job? So, but for an agent that isn't working that way, that is thinking to themselves, no one would go for that. A vendor wouldn't do that. Vendors just want to go on Rightmove. Like, how does it? Are you saying it doesn't work like that? Vendors do want to. They do like it when you show them that you've got these people, or how does that normally go?
I think it reinforces their belief that you're local and you're not just coming out with, like you said, the typical thing which everyone will probably be saying, we've got buyers on our database. I think you've got to work hard to differentiate yourself, because if you just relied on such as, we're on Rightmove, or we're on Zoopla, or we'll give you a featured listing, for example, before you know it, then again, like from a cost perspective, you're outlaying, they're not cheap, them listings. Like, so if that's all you've got to go at, it's very hard. So at least if you can show like that you've got people who are active, and it's just putting a bit more, I guess, meat on the bone, the fact that you've got actual genuine contacts that you can pick up the phone to and start calling and making things happen. And I guess from a buyers coming in, it's nice because, like I say, you're building that brand equity from the fact that people are liking the fact that you're ringing them.
Yeah.
How many times we must have registered with every estate agent going because we buy houses and stuff like that. None of them's ever said, we've got something coming up that's an off market. It's worst house on a decent street. Fantastic. When can I come round? No one does that. So when we look at all the different ways to try and show why we're different, you mentioned like the self-employed partners all sort of working off this collaborative database. It's part of the reason why we brought roots into the name, that we didn't want this hierarchy, so to speak, of the traditional agency model, but rather it be one big network of all self-employed agents buying into RedRoots, of this bigger system, and obviously with the multiple businesses as well that's embedded in there. So it's, in my mind, that just feels like a nice way to grow, rather than thinking, he's nicked my listing and that sort of thing.
It's very much.
And also, it's like when you're. What I've always enjoyed when we spoke is that you're not from a traditional estate agency background that decided to set up a self-employed model and go down that route. You actually have the other end of the spectrum of being an actual buyer, being a landlord, trying to find those off-market opportunities, and being at almost the reverse of the coalface.
How you'd want to be treated.
Yeah, how you want to be treated. So you've almost gone, right, how do we not want to be the traditional agent, and how do we make an agency that actually resonates with it? So if I was Stephen as a buyer going to RedRoots, and you can see that's evident. And also, I think, having seen you guys, especially in the last sort of few years, as you said, you transition between different people. The people you're working with now are the self-employed partner models, and the people I've had interactions with, you can definitely see that there's a RedRoots thing about them that's maybe different to previous people.
What must be interesting as well is, I guess, if those people are registering themselves and they're putting their details in, and they're automatically getting these alerts, you're speaking to a lot of those people. You must have a almost like a ready-made list of people that have also got houses to sell in that group of people.
I think that's the really exciting part from my side. I think when you're seeing these buyers register, because they're getting some value in the sense where they're seeing these properties before they hit the market, so it makes sense. It's free to register, takes a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden they're in the system. And obviously then they're not just in the system with nothing. The fact that they've filled in the search criteria, we know when they're ready to move, we know if they've got a property sale not yet on the market, we know if they're on the market, and all these, like I said, these opportunities which come out off the back of it. It's almost like this is kind of what me and Matt really, really wanted, really from the start, really. Agents doing their thing, providing the service, getting this nice turnover of basically clients in the local area wanting to do something with the property, and whether it's being us buying it, us knowing people who are ready to buy it, but then it's like comes back to they probably just want an estate agent that they're there, but we've got all these things. If they did need it, we're there lined up. All of a sudden, I'm going to sell, but my kitchen's not finished. Well,
yeah, we can help with that.
Yeah, and it's just stacks up nicely. And like I said, when you look at other agents, how many of them could have that conversation about, well, you could do this, you could have value here, there, and you know, all these different things, as opposed to, you know, and actually provide true solutions, which is, here's a number for someone who could generally just pop round, fix it, and it will add value. For example, like, you know, we go in some really poor areas, and we've been given somewhere it's like auction properties, and it's like, oh well, we're gonna get the windows fixed and all this, and it's like being able to give the advice. Well, to be fair, I'd probably just leave them boarded up and let's get it into an auction, because you know that's going to stand out really from a front picture. And having those honest conversations of all these different things where that's the last thing they want to do. They're selling for a reason. It's been boarded up. They know that they need windows in theory, but how many agents would go, yeah, well, stick some windows in and just, you know, get a lick of paint and change carpets. Well, it's a full refurb. It's going back to brick, you know.
Yeah.
Having them honest conversations with people where it's like, I don't know, just like you say, it's just we're wired up slightly differently to think what's in the best interest of the client.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see it through their eyes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What I've also enjoyed with you guys is the aspect of videos, and I know obviously it's been a boom maybe in the last few years with videos, but you've gone very high production, tours, drones, and so do you teach your partners to do that, or do you have that as outsourced, or how does that work with you guys?
So we've got two sort of marketing experts, as I like to call them, in terms of like we've got a lad called Otis and a lad called Paul. They're pretty much, we outsource it to them. So right, here you are, Paul, here's the keys. So got a couple of hours, do your thing, and they will do everything. Virtual tours, the drones, the floor plans, pictures, everything, and then obviously just bring it back to us. How we're doing it at the moment with the partners is we want someone to be able to do that level of quality. Now, it's hard for me to advocate them doing their own pictures and trying to cut corners and all that side, because obviously I feel like you can't really do it as well as a specialist can anyway. But then also, like you say, from like a time perspective, you've got a database of buyers. Do your agency stuff to get in the more business and make sure you're delegating that straight away. Just because you've got that empty calendar because you've just started, don't get into the bad habits, you know. Like I say, we've been there. We've been very much whole DIY side, and it's only when you start to then bring in the specialists, you start to see things happen. And from our branding perspective, as long as the agents are bringing someone in who's of that similar quality, I mean, everyone uses either Otis or Paul at the moment, and we just charge a £250 upfront onboarding cost. That goes towards Otis and Paul. It's always thereabouts the $250. And then at least you know, right, all your marketing's done, right, now do what you're supposed to from an agency perspective. But I've not really had it where they're like, oh, can we do our own photos? I think like because they're coming from these different angles, it's like, absolutely, that makes sense. You know,
it's such a great point, because I think like because you've got that centralised database of buyers where you're specifically looking to proactively do something with the property before it goes onto the portals, because you've got this, you know, exclusive period, if you like. Exactly what you just said, like old school estate agency was like that. You do your thing as an agent. You don't need to go around and take photos and measure up and do a floor plan and all of that sort of stuff. But if your job is putting the house on Rightmove, then you create this value for yourself by going and doing the photos and the videos. And if you weren't doing the photos and the videos and someone else was, and you were just pressing the button to put it on Rightmove, then what are you doing then? Like nothing really. So I think the two things go together there, don't they? Like I might as well do the photos and the videos if I'm not doing anything else. But if you're working in the way you are, whereby like, you know, you're bringing in all these registrations and people are getting alerts, and then you can actively do something to try and sell the house and be an agent, then it makes more financial sense for you to outsource and go like, let's get an expert in to do the, the media side of it.
No different than back to what you said previously, like what you were originally career-wise for, and the diagnostics of a client and stuff like that. Same with like, I'm sure you probably, when you were in that career, you weren't booking in the appointments, seeing the client, doing the follow-up, writing out things like doing the, I don't know, cleaning the toilets, whatever it might be. So there must be some synergy which you saw then. It's like, okay, well, that person's the expert in making a house look amazing. So like we source that time, trade off that time versus the money. Like I could be doing more proactive stuff around communicating to the database or speaking to clients or doing something than standing around, walking around the house, drawing a floor plan out and then trying to put it on a bit of software, because that's not really going to come to fruition unless I could just be talking to a load of people about the house and trying to get them around there whilst it's been done. That's good. And also I think it creates brand synergy with what you said about RedRoots. Like, I think speaking to a lot of clients who may be looking at the self-employed model and whether they hybrid into it, one of the main things that I try and speak to them about is like making sure that you have your brand guidelines or how you put stuff to market that's not just random. So one agent's doing a completely random to another agent, and then you as the owner of that business is thinking like, I didn't want to create this when we set up and did ourselves.
Like Founder.
Yeah,
You've never watched The Founder?
The film,
Yes.
yeah.
Like
It's like making chicken.
Yeah,
Like
he
he's
turns up
making
at
chicken
McDonald's,
burgers at McDonald's. And
Burgers.
he's like, yeah.
He's good doing pizza and all sorts.
Yeah.
In fairness, I used to work at Macca's, and that was probably the step before the NHS side, where, like you say, you recognise how much you are sort of almost pigeonholed. Like,
Yeah.
I used to work on the burger counter, and it's like we were near the Huddersfield football ground, so Saturday afternoons. I was lucky to be part of the Star Burger team, but you'd only you'd have someone on the buns, someone on the dressing, someone on the meat, and then one person wrapping. Yeah. You know, and if it were busy, you were literally just buns in, buns out, buns in, buns out. You weren't even trusted to make the whole burger. It was broken down that much, and it was a bit monotonous for 8 hours and all that side. But it certainly showed how can they get these people who are, typically sort of students and apparently everything that's wrong with society, but they just seem to do the function. It's because it's been broken down to, it's hard to mess, don't take the buns out and burn it, but
not do it random.
Sure, we've spoke about it before, haven't we? Like children that can't, like you say, children that can't even clean their own bedroom, but somehow can work in this machine of an organisation. It's brilliant.
When you look back and like you said, films like The Founder were like, wow, I was part of that cog, and at the time you didn't really feel like it, but it's only time when you sort of come away from it and you reflect on that side, it's interesting, isn't it?
It ties in with what you were saying earlier, though, doesn't it? Like, you need the people that fit your culture, and then you need a process. And if you can get those two things together, then all of a sudden, that complaint that it's the millennials, or it's the Generation Alpha, Generation Z, X, whatever, all kind of goes out the window, because no, the problem was actually you, and you didn't have a process, and you didn't have a culture, and you didn't have a way of recruiting people. You just hired random people and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's the actual problem. And if you fix that, then suddenly it becomes all of a sudden easy to find people that you consider to be great. And I might not consider them great because they might not fit my culture and my process, but it's much easier to find people when you can tell them what the rules of the game are going to be.
Mm.
It's quite interesting from the hub perspective, really, that we just hired another lady, and again, knowing that we're going to be working full time with this person, like I say, I was quite nervous about it and almost about to pay a recruitment company an extortionate amount, to be fair. But fortunately, we came across someone who we recommended, and she just seemed to again fit into our values. The sort of she did have a bit of experience 20 years ago working in an estate agency, but other than that, it's always been like PT. But you could just straight away, you got a positive feel for it. I'm going to be working with this person 5-6 days a week, so does she bring positive energy to the room, or is she one of these that's going to look for problems? And I think again, not so much like an interview, but it was just more like an informal chat. But we're asking the questions, and you sort of got the vibe straight away that she certainly wasn't one of these people who were just going to find problems and start looking for, or quizzing you too much on like the HR matters and how much annual leave, what time can I finish, and all this sort of thing. And you felt like, oh yeah, well look, if you need weekend viewings, oh yeah, I'll sort it, and all that side. And it's not something which you'd ever want to sort of abuse, but it just shows like a mindset perspective, this person's here to genuinely help and do the right thing. And sure enough, if she needs a dentist appointment, clock off a bit early and all that side, because it's always going to work itself out. But walking into the office, it's always morning, straight away it's like, right, it sets the tone. Whereas some, it's like, I've called in this morning early doors, and tea, they're in a quarter of an hour before they should. Teas are getting made and doing bits in the office. It's great to see from my perspective, but you just feel like, yeah, it's a nice environment that we've got here. Mm-hmm. And I think when I explained to them about my concerns about hiring and making sure they're the right fit, I think I think they kind of like that, knowing that, look, we're trying to protect something here. You know, it's we've got, yes, my family, i.e. me and Matt, but then it's like slightly wider perimeter is you guys, and you're part of that, and we're only going to bring in people who are right, and if they're not right, then we'll usher them out. And as I say, so far so good. We're a small team. We've still got plenty of lessons to learn. But
and so probably a final question before we wrap up. Where do you see RedRoots going forward? Maybe over the next year or so. What's your plans?
Yeah, I think now we're sort of, like I say, we've got 3 partners on boarded. I think it'd be nice to sort of just slowly start to almost patch by patch. So a little bit on how we work things. It's they take up a patch, so to speak. They take on the license for that area. In an ideal world, they live in that specific location, and then basically they've got the exclusivity for that. Now, what that means is that they could list anywhere, but any business that we can pass that's generated, again, through like your likes of life cycle and things like that, it gets assigned down to that person. So at the end of the day, if the phone rings and it's in their patch, we've got to be able to pass it on to them, but still giving them the autonomy to follow the client, because we believe in that, the whole client for life side. So I would like to find a few neighbouring patches surrounding the areas that we've already got partner agents. Again, keep filling up that database, keep flushing out these opportunities, keep growing the brand quite organically, but with the nice 5-star Google reviews, making sure that we're getting a good name for it. And I think really almost, like I said, just keep refining the process that we're starting to build out. Like you mentioned earlier, from partner 1 to partner 3, I'd like to think by the time we get to partner 4, 5 or 6, we'll come on further leaps and bounds and be that bit more organised and that bit more, almost lay out the red carpet, so to speak, so then the agents can really just start to slot in and just, from our point, keep refining those processes and bringing in the right people. And I think if we can do that over the next even couple of years, I think business-wise we'll be doing well. I think we'll have a really good culture, and it'll make it a decent place to spend your working hours.
Great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks for jumping on.
No worries.
Thanks for listening to this Estate Agency X podcast. Can you make sure that you're actually subscribed to this podcast channel if you liked the content? It helps us massively to get better guests, and it just helps us generally. So you might think you're subscribed, but just have a double check, whatever your podcast platform of preference is, that you're actually subscribed, and then that way we can continue to grow the channel and get better and better guests for you.